So my name is Diana. I am with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program here at UF. Today is November 1st, 2023. I'm here with author Anjanette Delgado. But again, just for the record, can you introduce yourself, please?
Of course. My name is Anjanette Delgado. It's such a weird name, right? Because Anjanette is French. It's really Ana Juana. But my mother had a thing for a French actress. So what can I tell you? I am a writer. I am a Puerto Rican writer living in Florida. I write about heartbreak, about social justice, about displacement. And I've been writing now for close to 3 decades.
Oh, wow.
Professionally, as close to 3 decades. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing? I read on one of your pieces for the New York Times that you were born and raised in Carolina, Puerto Rico.
Right. That's right. I was actually born in Centro Médico, right? Puerto Ricans born. I was born at the hospital. And then the first few years of my life, I was in a caserío, a government housing called Luis Lloren Torres, which was very well known back then for all the violence. Eventually, I think I was 3 maybe when we moved to Carolina for more violence, because I come from a very violent home, which is what made us leave Puerto Rico. My mother and my sister and I, we left Puerto Rico in the mid-70s, and we went to the South Bronx. Cannot tell you what a childhood in the South Bronx is in the 70s is like. This was the time of Son of Sam and lots of other things. Eventually we returned to Puerto Rico, and then I just stayed there until after I'd had my children as an adult. I graduated from University of Puerto Rico, and had a Puerto Rican life. Yeah.
So now I know that you live in Miami, like you're based in Miami. What brought you there? Like, how did you get there?
Yeah. So I'm a lot of what I write has to do with what I call sexile. I was sex, right? So there was when we returned to Puerto Rico, my father found my mother, and he was very upset that she had been away for 3 years, hiding from him and from his violence. So we went through a whole lot of violence once we got back. And eventually I got into, I became a journalist. I studied to be a journalist. And the 90s, the early 90s, the late 80s and early 90s in Puerto Rico was a particularly violent year. A lot of people were leaving for economic reasons to Orlando and other places, New York. But I left because of gender violence. In my case, my father's, but also what I was coming into contact with as a journalist. It was just terrible. I remember working on a special program summarizing the year, all the news of the decade and the year 19, and saying, I can't stay here. I can't stay here. I was paranoid. I would be looking under, beds and all of that. And I decided to apply for an internship at CNN. So I moved to Atlanta.
Okay. So you moved from Puerto Rico to Atlanta.
And I stayed there for almost 2 years. And then a job opportunity came up in Miami, and I came to Miami, for which I'm very happy.
Oh, that's nice. So yeah, like speaking about this violence, like I read your New York Times piece that came out that you published in June, I believe.
Actually, August 2019 was that at least in English it was published June of 2019, and then August of 2019, and then eventually became part of an anthology called Making Good Time, which is about Florida.
Oh, I was speaking about what women of the world's oldest colony.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, if most people know my Water Love column, then they don't know my recent opinion piece. I'm so sorry. Yeah, this was in June, just about a few weeks ago. Yeah.
No, you're completely fine. Like, I did this research. Like, I was like,
you did good. Most people, they stay on the what do you call it, la superficie, right? They don't go
Yeah.
deep. And they don't come up on that piece. But yeah, no, that piece was in June. And yeah, I write a little bit about my family there.
Hmm.
I do believe that, I mean, I wasn't trying to blame all the gender violence on colonization, but I do think
Yes.
it's a starting point, it's a context
Hmm.
for some of what happens in Puerto Rico, for sure.
Yeah. So I feel okay. I shouldn't say I feel like, because that goes away from interview protocol here. But anyway,
I think
I
interpretation can feel.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I feel like Latinas often grow up with this instilled fear of men, whether it is because we witness this violence within our own families and communities, or because we hear about it in the news, and and like our mothers and our grandmothers are like, be careful or whatever, because this could happen to you, right?
Right.
So how do you think this experience influences your work today, not only because you're a mother of daughters, but you yourself as a woman and as a daughter?
Yeah. And it's funny that you say, we Latinas, right? Because one would say, well, there's violence everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's gender violence, there's rape, there's other kinds of gendered violence um, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
However, and I can't talk for all of Latinas, but I can tell you that for Puerto Rico, as you know, it's a small island.
Yeah.
Small island. I went once to present my first novel, and I just went there. They interviewed me for 4 or 5 shows, and by evening I was famous. I was at the with my mom, and people were recognizing me from TV, and I was like, this is crazy. It just from that day, but it's not just a small in size, but it's also
Very tight knit,
yes,
all
very
those
compact,
communities.
right?
Yeah.
Very compact. When there's an escándalo, right? We're all talking about the same thing that day. When there's a
Yeah.
big crime like there was recently, it's a whole national thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you do feel a little bit more paranoid about things. You
Mm-hmm.
do feel like they're closer to you. And I think I had that feeling even back then. We're talking about the 90s. Um, and I see it now. For example, even with what's happening in Gaza right now, I
Yeah.
feel it closer. I don't feel like it's happening all the way over there. I am thinking about it every day. I'm reading about it every day. I'm looking at the images. I'm hearing the people cry, hearing people speak, and it feels closer. I think back then, before we had, you know, social media,
Mm-hmm.
even we're prone to, emailing constantly all day long. When making a phone call to Puerto Rico, even from Atlanta, cost I don't know how many, cents a minute, and
Yeah.
you didn't have long conversations because you had 10 minutes left on the card. Things felt more compact and more isolated on the island than maybe even they feel now, even though the violence is still there in the same way, right?
Yeah.
So for us, at least, and I'm sure for other Caribbean women, it felt and it feels a little closer, a little bit more in your face, a
Yeah.
little more present and urgent, right? So yeah, it has influenced my writing. Of course, it has. Although I wish it had influenced it more and sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the being sexiled,
Mm-hmm.
right, is that and other traumas that bring displacement is that you first need to do quite a few things. There's a piece I wrote for Lit Hub based on the prologue to my anthology, Home in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I explain the plight of the writer is that the displaced writer is first you have to survive, right? You go to this other place in which you at least at first may not fit in.
Yep.
You have to find a job, find a place to live, learn where things are, learn how to be, how to speak to others, how to communicate, understand what's happening where you are now. That takes a while.
Yeah.
You're not writing when you're doing that, right? You're not writing when you're doing that. Then you have to you have to deal with the there that you left behind, being a person who left.
Yeah.
Whatever that you left, it's still with you, but you left it. And there are concerns and there are things that have to do with having left.
Yeah.
Deal with that first. Then you have to find your tribe, your other writers. You have to find other people who tell you that you should be writing. Especially because when I moved away, I wasn't an author.
Yeah.
I was a writer inside, but I wasn't an author. I didn't yet know whether my work was worthy
Yeah.
of being written, of existing, of being, anthologized and protected in a collection such as yours, in a project such as yours. I didn't know that. So, I'd write a little and then I'd say, what am I doing? I need to take care of my kids. They need me, and the writing was set aside. So I think as a result, and then you have to deal with whatever trauma exiled you, in my case, the gender violence. You have to find the words for it and strength to say it and the courage to say it out loud and find a way to tell yourself about it and then find a way to tell others about it. The whole thing, right? Before you're able to write a piece such as the one that you found that I'm so grateful for, is that my editor at the New York Times is going to be so happy, because that piece was so long coming. So long coming, Diane. I cannot. And even after I wrote it, I researched and I found facts to validate those things that I wasn't there for.
Yeah.
Right. I wasn't there for colonization, obviously, even though I'm still being colonized right now. But this is another, right? It's a new stage of colonization right now.
Yeah.
There for the beginning of which I had to talk to explain. And so even for that, I felt like, do I have the right to tell this?
Yeah.
To talk about this? Right? What will people in Puerto Rico think? Right? I have the chance to write in a big journal with a huge platform, and I about a bad thing as opposed to thing. And there are many good things, by the way, many good things in Puerto Rico. It's just a lovely place. It's just a magical place which bring magical people, right? Magical people sometimes get too magical, and the too magical sometimes has issues, again, because it's so tight knit that everything has of an effect. But yeah, that piece was just so long. I'm so glad you found it, and were able to read it as a Puerto Rican woman and figure out for yourself what you believed.
Yeah. So a lot of things in your piece really like resonaban with me, like these questions of seeing like these women in your life being like stuck with these men that you're so incredible, why are you here? Right. But I think that not to not digress too much because I want to go through a lot. One of the points that you just made is how the plight of the writer, the displaced writer, and how you have to survive that displacement kind of reminded me of your lyric essay, Heartbreak Nation. And I'm assuming that this is a very personal essay, that the person you're talking about is yourself. And how you had a moment with, I guess, a sex worker at a hospital that said that heartbreak is a first world condition.
Yeah.
And how you have, I guess that there has to be a certain level of comfort to actually like kind of leave, to actually be able to feel that pain and that heartbreak as vividly as you described it in that essay. which is amazing. It's a great essay, by the way.
Thank
I'll
you.
share
Thank
it
you.
with my mom.
It was recently translated to Spanish and to French. I participated in the Spanish translation. I wasn't able to participate in the French because my French is horrible. It's really bad. But yeah, that essay is a wonderful thing for me. It was a wonderful thing for me to be able to write it. It took a long, long time. It started out as a poem when I didn't know what a lyric essay was.
Yeah.
And I remember my wonderful, fantastic poetry teacher, Campbell McGrath, also Florida transplant, right? He's here. He's been here now for forever. I think of him as a Florida writer. He'd say, you know, what's wrong here? He couldn't find the poetics because I was in the midst, right, between poetry and lyricism and actual poetry. So that was also tugging, right? Your the mastery of your craft. You know, not that any of us ever really achieve it, except maybe Toni Morrison, I think. other greats like Esmeralda Santiago and others. But you're also struggling with what am I writing, in what shape, what how does this want to be told? And at the same dealing with, you know, what you're trying to say, with eliciting or excavating, right, what's inside, and then figuring out how to tell the story. What story is it that you're going to tell? I go through this with my students all the time.
Yes, you're a lecturer at Miami-Dade, right? Correct.
I am at Miami-Dade occasionally. I also every so often teach at Florida International University. I've taught at Eckerd College. I've conferenced in many other writing conferences, and so my students are usually people who want to write.
Yeah.
Were interested in writing, and so yeah, there is that process, right? You have to deal with the content of the writing, but then also with the form and shape of the writing. And if you will, the rhythm of what you're revealing, right? If my other teacher, Lynn Barrett, my thesis director, were here, she would say, there are two stories. There's what happened, and there's how you choose in what order and in what shape you choose to tell what happened. And that is very related to what you're saying, right? What the displaced writer needs to deal with before what they write can be of any value to anybody. And so Heartbreak Nation was also a moment where there was a process of, am I an American? Well, I'm here and I love this country and I do love being here, but this is the country that's colonizing my country.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's this weird dynamic, right? It's like we're daughters of a father that is good to some of his kids, to some of his daughters, right? And not to others, right? Not to Black daughters, not to brown daughters.
Yeah.
Displaced daughter, not to queer daughters.
Yeah.
Often not to poor daughters.
Yeah.
And so you know, I can be with a white sister and she has a whole other vision of that patriarchal dad that is her country.
Yeah.
And I have a different vision of this stepfather that history imposed. And so that essay, it was mixing all these personal things with the heartbreak that is in this country, that other people who aren't brown, who aren't displaced, they were born here, they were raised here, they're still displaced. They're displaced by racism. They're displaced by, you know, a whole homophobia. Some by class, right? By what, you know, a Supreme Court judge might do from the perch of his, you know, white tower, even though he's a Black man. So all of that goes in there, right?
Yeah. So, okay. you write like Heartbreak Nation, like you read it and you feel it like right here, like in your throat when you read it. Like it's so raw and it's so personal. Do you consider it to be hard to share something so personal to the eyes of the world that like it's open for conversation and maybe even like judgment and criticism?
My God, Diane, what a great question. Because you see, I wrote my first novel when I was 10. I thought it was a novel. It was only like 13 pages. But to me, that was a novel.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then something happened to me, right? Life happened and poverty and all kinds of things. And I came to believe that I couldn't write, that I couldn't be a fiction writer, that I needed a career. Also, because I became a mother so young, I
Yeah.
needed a salary and I didn't understand how people lived. I still don't. How people lived from their writing. I didn't have anybody who was a writer that I knew beyond
Yeah.
my teachers. And I didn't know how to create that life. And so I decided for second best, which was being a journalist. In my mind, that was second best, right? Because
Yeah.
I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write fiction and nonfiction. I wanted to tell my stories, but I didn't know how to. I didn't think that that was a thing
Mm-hmm.
other for people with connections or people whose family came from families of writers
Yeah.
or new publishers. And so I became a journalist. And back then, in early 80s, or I'm sorry, late 80s, early 90s, sounds so ancient. Um, now, then you weren't part of the story. The whole point of journalism
Yeah.
was objectivity, which I
Yeah.
think was kind of a false, notion in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think anybody ever keeps themselves out of anything. From the moment
Especially
we,
when it comes to what you create. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so I become a journalist, and I now realize how tough it was not to bring it to myself, but I
Mm-hmm.
did it, right? So, for example, I did a series in 1991 called Las Mujeres de Casa Julia,
Mm-hmm.
for which I went and stayed at a shelter, one of the oldest shelters. I think it was the first shelter for domestic violence victims and their children.
Mm-hmm.
And and I and it was hard, right? Because it had to be a piece, almost, it should have been a piece from a person perspective, but it couldn't be
Yeah.
because I was doing it so I was interviewing the other women, and I remember feeling so weird interviewing them about things that I had gone through.
Yeah.
But so you did that, but keeping myself out of it, right?
Yeah.
That's why before, when you were saying, well, I feel I'm departing interviewer protocol. And I said, no, no, you're not. Interviewers bring themselves into the stories. And why are they interested in interviewing this person and not this other one, right? There has to be something personal in those things that you're interested in. And
Yeah.
so that's super hard for me. And then when I first started writing, I entered literature through fiction.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to be one of those writers whose first novels are thinly veiled portraits of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, because the first thing that comes out of your mouth when you're freer to write beyond facts
Mm-hmm.
are going to be those things that are inside you already,
Yeah.
that you've lived through, that right? And so at first, what was hard was not talking about myself, about these stories that were on the tip of my tongue,
Yeah.
on the tip of my soul, I would say, which was so bruised from all those things. And then little by little, there's a class I teach called Writing Protest, and it's about that. It's about, now let's turn
Mm-hmm.
the gaze to you, and
Mm.
you write about those things. How do you, bring up those things and write about them? And so one of the things I say in that class is the moment I decided that I should write about these things, that I could and should write about these things, all my writing became more powerful. My essays became more powerful, but also my fiction became more powerful, and I became a happier writer
Yeah.
because I felt I was being more honest. And by honest, I mean giving more of myself, which is what I think an artist does,
Yeah.
right? Take the garbage, you take the poop, and you try to turn it into something beautiful to give to others.
Yeah.
And you give to others so they won't be alone, so they won't think, oh, it's just me. No, it's not just you. I'm here with you. I've gone through what you've gone through and worse. This is how it seemed to me. And look, I did it in this way. You know, I may have other problems, but I don't have that problem. And this is how I walked out of there.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's why we write. I think that's the whole reason of being of nonfiction, and
Yeah.
I argue all literature, right? Poetry and fiction too. So no,
Mm.
it wasn't hard. It was hard not to have been able to do it for so long. Now, individually, once I get into a piece, like right now, I'm talking about incest, and it
Mhm.
is so difficult. That one way that I found to be able to write these things, to write about guilt, to write about, for example, my mother's role in
Mhm.
all of is to segment it, right? To tell it slant, as the book says,
Yeah.
um, and to segment it into lyrical essays. So Heartbreak Nation, which
Yeah.
you write, the way to write about these things was to take it one bit at a time,
Mm.
tell that one moment, and then use that moment as a base for talking more broadly about the issue, and
Yeah.
then go back in a third section with the lupa, right? With the magnifying glass, and going into that very hurtful, and also working with different um not genres but forms
Yeah.
within even an essay on a very difficult topic, right? So
Mhm.
I'm section that's a recipe for food, and then later go on to say about the last time I saw my house in Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
and what my mother said and what I said, and
Yeah.
in being with my children, and at first not missing anything because I was so overwhelmed, at first not missing the land or friends or the work
Yeah.
or even my own mother. But later, then taking all these years to reclaim it. In fact, I'm writing a piece right now for the New York Times about art,
Mm.
art, visual art. As you can see, I'm into it. But using that to starting to collect Puerto Rican artists as a way back to Puerto Rico, as a
Yeah.
way of feeling it's my land, as a way to feel excited about going back instead of scared.
Yeah. So, um, Jesus. It kind of reminds me, like, here at UF, we have a gallery that came through. Like, these people bought a bunch of art from Cuban artists, and it's very political art, and it's very, and like it's being exhibited.
Yeah.
It's being exhibited at the our art museum here. Like, I thought
Oh,
that it would be so cool to see this from Puerto Rican artists.
oh my goodness. I cannot
And
tell
yeah, um,
I cannot tell you what art is happening in Puerto Rico. It's freaking amazing. I can give you a tour in a little bit. I have I'm proud to have some of it at home. It's amazing
that's
what's being
that's
created.
so nice.
Yeah.
So again, like, we talk about this, like how creative writing, again, it's a form of art, form of expression. It's very it's deeply personal to the writer, right? So you personally, can you, like, is there a process that you go through before actually writing? Like, is it like, do you start maybe with an outline and then go from there, or does it vary, do you think?
Okay, so it depends what I'm writing, right?
Yeah.
Depends what I'm writing. I don't start with anything for poetry, even if it's long poetry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share with you later an unedited piece called I Want to Write a Post-Colonial Poem, but I Am a Puerto Rican Woman.
Mm-hmm.
And patriarchy and colonialism go together like arroz con habichuelas.
Yeah.
It's a whole manifesto, ranting, sobbing,
Yeah.
thrusting piece. And of course, even though there's a lot of history and research there, I didn't have a process other than sitting down and hearing music. For poetry, I think first I have to hear the sound and feel what kind of poem does it want to be? Does it want to be a ghazal? Does it want to protest? Does it want to cry? Does it want to love? Does it want to teach? Does it want to be clever? Right? So what does the poem want to be? What does that voice want to be?
Yeah.
What mood is it in? Right? Is it angry, happy, loving? So that's for poetry. And then for nonfiction, I find that I do have to decide to write about something and then segment it,
Yeah.
right? Because even the things that happen to us have sides, have
Yeah.
parts, right? This essay that I'm writing right now, it's an essay. Believe it or not, it's supposed to be an essay about Gilmore Girls, the TV show, one of the whitest TV shows ever created, right?
Mm-hmm.
But those white TV shows for us are parts of how we learn to live here, how we learn to be
Yeah.
in this space, right? As displaced people, we say, oh, so this place where I am, they value small town
Yeah.
community, but it's very white, but it's their community, right? They value whiteness,
Mm-hmm.
even unconsciously, right? In Gilmore Girls, right? Everybody knows each other. There are no Black people there. And
Yeah.
they're a little apprehensive of outsiders. And if those outsiders are not white, I imagine, even though they don't show it in the series, that they're even more apprehensive of change to their
Yeah.
tight community where everybody knows each other and safety depends on that. So I'm watching that. And it's ended up being a story about guilt and motherhood, right? My guilt with my own daughters and what it meant to be a single mom and not have all that time and attention that they may have needed all the time.
Yeah.
What that did versus my own mother and how I felt she didn't choose me. She didn't always choose me.
Yeah.
In light of violence. And then analyzing how my own mother was in some way socialized not to
Mm-hmm.
not to defend me, and how her own womanhood may have depended on her own safety, bodily safety, may have depended on how she chose to defend me, how she chose not to make this or that worse, how she chose not to speak up and maybe have me taken or my sister into foster care, how
Yeah.
she chose to sometimes stand in front of a blow for me, right? But how she also chose not to leave the person
Yeah.
doing. So all those very complex things about mothers and daughters, which in Gilmore Girls you see, right? You have the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't know that that's what it was going to be, but I did know that I wanted to talk about guilt as a mother and how Gilmore Girls makes it worse because even the single mom in the story does everything for her daughter and has time to listen and to be present
Yeah.
and looks for it. And of course, at some point, I get to the point, well, it's fictional. it's fictional. And there are a lot of things that even that single mother doesn't have to deal with that I did have to deal with. Um, not to put her down as a mother, right?
Yeah.
And not to put her plight down as a mother, but just it was different,
Yeah.
different mine because I'm different. Um, so that's the process for for nonfiction. I feel like I start with something with a given, but then I have to excavate and excavate, and that's the hardest for me, by the way. It's the
Yeah.
hard um because I have to be get away from whatever I'm writing. Sometimes it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm those words again and again. I'm editing those words again and again, and I'm asking myself, are you telling the truth? Are you, are you sure they said that? Are you sure? Was that really what you felt? Is that really why you did this or that? Are
Yeah.
you letting yourself off the hook? Right. And then fiction is difficult in a different way. I feel like when people ask about process, they're mostly asking about fiction because fiction is so mythologized, right? Fiction is difficult for me in that I'm too conscious of crafting, of
Yeah.
creating. It's harder for me to forget I'm writing and to just be telling the story. In The Art of Fiction, John Gardner talks about it's a long dream. You have to think of it and feel of it and be in it as a long dream.
Yeah.
Um, and that is harder for me for different reasons.
Mm.
And so I don't have an outline. I have a scene and a topic that I start with,
Mm.
and I try to go scene by scene, just discovering as I go, which is why it takes me so long to write novels. I do have a process that comes from television that
Yeah.
I use for scripting, which is, in scripting, you first write a treatment, which is basically you tell the story in very broad strokes in three or
Yeah.
four pages. You say you tell exactly what happens, looking at it from a standpoint of place,
Hmm.
because the director needs to know where the actors are going to be at any given time.
Yeah.
Often I use that strategy, which has different things. I make collage photos of the characters, how I see them in, from magazines, and just kind of get a sense of place. And I may do a little research, of course. And then I try to do a treatment, and I try to go as far as I can. Usually for a novel, I never get to the end. Before I want to start writing actual scenes.
Yeah.
And then I go from there. It's trying to finish that outline, trying
Yeah.
to fill the gaps while also writing scenes that sometimes direct me to a completely different place, right? Like the novel I'm writing now, it's a woman who escaped a man who was beating her.
Hmm.
And so she escapes, doesn't tell anybody, not even her parents, where she's going. And she's in Miami hiding at a job in a little community newspaper that has a big notion of itself, wants to be a whole a little bit like the Miami Times, right? Wants to do exposés and wants to do take down politicians and take down corruption. And there she is trying to be a journalist while hiding from herself.
Yeah.
Um, so that one has been super hard, and I think it has to do with that, right? Finding that character that has a lot of myself in it.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that creative writing, nonfiction, fiction, poetry, all types, is this process of constant self-reflection, which can become very exhausting, especially if we're talking about nonfiction, because again, it's
Yeah.
real. It was real. And of course, like we understand that it takes a long time, but do you think that it makes it easier to have a kind of like a team behind you to help you finish these projects? Like, do you have an editor, like someone that goes through stuff with you and for you? And does that make the process easier?
Yeah, I'm gonna take your question as a it's a premonition. I've been looking for that team all my life. I don't think I've ever really had it. I do have a lot of writer friends, a community of
Mm,
writer friends, both in English and Spanish. When I write in Spanish and when I write in English, and that has been invaluable. I go every year to conferences. I apply to a bunch and then choose one to go. I can't really afford to go to a lot of them. Um, but I try to go to at least one because that's where you get the energy of the tribe,
yeah,
that community. They're not editing and helping in that sense, but they're writing with you. You know, writing
yeah,
is so solitary, right? Um, I do have an agent, but he's selling books. He needs to survive as well.
yeah.
And so pretty soon I'm going to be needing a new agent. I've been moving into more literary writing, and that means a new agent looking to represent that kind of writing.
Yeah.
Um, Often my friends will be like, "What?" Because I'll call them when there's somebody that I understand how they read and how they write, and I'll say, "Hey, can I hire you to help me with this? Can I hire you to help me edit?" And most of the time, what I hire is developmental editing. It's
Mm,
sort of like the beta reader that everybody talks about, except other writers, the people that I want to talk to about these things, they need their time for writing. So I like to pay for it. So I hire them. I pay them a fee, whatever fee we agree on to look at it, to point out certain things, especially when I'm doing things that I'm not used to doing. So that like this with this the post-colonial poem that I was mentioning,
mm-hmm.
I hired, former teachers, and I hired Puerto Rican poets to take a look and tell me, listen, am I estoy fuera el plato, right?
Yeah.
Am I um talking about things I don't really know about, thinking that I know about them?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Puerto Rican person, is this offensive to you? Is that offensive to you? What do you think of this or that? Because there's all kinds of things that you need from a team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Eventually, I think whoever my new agent is, will be that. And when something is sold, then yes, your editor is part of that team. Absolutely, they're
Mm,
champ. Nobody else will know your book as well as somebody who either translates it or edits it, right?
yeah.
And then your fans, you do get some, and they're fanatical about your writing. And there's a really great review written about home in Florida. I'll send it to you. So good. And I had to call Liz, the writer, and just say, my goodness, did you read cover to cover? Were you in my head when I was writing? Because she did such a close reading.
Yeah.
So we talk about the book, and that's a great person to talk about the book with and to learn about, to make part of your team, as you put it, which I love how you put it. Because they know they were attracted to that writing for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
and so they know more than is on the page, right? They're really looking at that subtext and
Yeah.
understanding it. So
Yeah.
wish I had more.
Um,
I do.
so so you talk about the Gilmore Girls and how these, let's call them white TV shows, serve as a form of kind of like gauging culturally where you're at when you're like not home,
Yeah.
right? So something that has become kind of that I hear a lot is that a lot of people use these TV shows to learn English, right? And like language acquisition is a huge part
Yeah.
of the process of acculturation and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So what do you like? Do you think? do you consider that popular culture media, has kind of influenced your perception, like your perception, let's start like from when you were a kid and how it changed. How do I make sense?
I think I understand what you're asking.
Hmm.
Here's the thing: you're gonna live here, right?
Yeah.
You can't live surrounded by enemies.
Hmm.
You can't make them enemies by your own perception. There's
Hmm.
so many people. There are so many pasty white people that I owe everything to. You
Yeah.
know, so many professors with not an ounce of black under, running through their veins, who have been more empathetic, more supportive, more understanding,
Hmm.
more who have made it possible for me
Hmm.
write all that I've written to get here.
Yeah.
And I think those shows, popular media, as you say, have a role, because you do have to learn how to be in the new place that you are, because eventually you should want to contribute to any place that you are, right? There's the
Hmm.
history of whatever the colonizers did, whatever people decided 100 years ago. And I
Hmm.
understand there are also the slights of ignorant people right now, right, who make you go through a lot of things. But there's a larger community that is largely embracing you
Hmm.
into their culture and into their space, physical space. And I do
Hmm.
think that you should want to understand and contribute, right? When I first met my husband, he was anti-rule, and he was Cuban. He's Cuban, and he hadn't been here a long time, and he felt it that he was not being himself. He didn't talk loudly. I said, no, 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 no. Let's follow the rules. We're here. There are rules here that are different. Doesn't, there's no reason to talk loudly. There's no
Hmm.
reason to feel ashamed if you're excited one day and, spoke loudly. But let's not aim to speak loudly and be a disturbance to others. That doesn't mean not being yourself. Yourself is sometimes quiet, and yourself is sometimes not quiet,
Yeah.
right? All of those are parts of yourself. We can choose to follow rules. This is a society of rules,
Yeah.
and not that ours isn't, right? It's just maybe our particular environment may not have been, but that is not to say. So I think these shows, this popular media, helps us to gauge where we are in relation to where we've come.
Yeah.
Florida especially, right? There are so many Latinos around now, and all that sometimes you mistake it, especially living in Miami, where Latinos are a majority.
Hmm.
And forget that you're still living in the mainland United States, and you should be respectful, and you should, stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance and learn it and recite it and pledge it when you're here. And if you don't want to say it for whatever reason, then don't say it, but stand up and put your hand on your heart, and just be respectful to others, just like you would if you went to a synagogue, whether you were Jewish or not. You would
Yeah.
still, you know, try to understand. And shows help us do that. They also help us see ourselves sometimes, right? If you see a sitcom where there's somebody who looks like you or speaks like you also say, "Oh, look at that person. They're part of this society too, just like I am." And yeah, there's a role for that. There's a role. It's another form of art, right? Of storytelling.
Yeah.
So I think that, yeah, there's definitely a role for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So soon you're gonna be participating once again in the Miami Book Fair, which
Yeah.
I am super excited about because I have never been. Even though I did live in Miami. We moved to Miami from Puerto Rico in 2017, and I just didn't know how to get around. But now I know, I'm going.
Are you a Hurricane Maria exile?
No, actually, I moved in January. So it was
Okay.
like
Wow.
right before Hurricane Maria.
Wow, that must have been crazy. I
Yeah,
just
like
got happened. The guilt and the, oh my goodness, that's a book right there.
so yeah, like I still have family in Puerto Rico. They're fine. Everyone is good. But yeah, like you have one presentation for Ni Locas Ni Solas,
Right?
and then you have a conversation with Daughters of Latin America. So
Yeah.
could you like
Now I'm actually going to be also, they've added this. I'm in conversation with Esmeralda and Elizabeth Acevedo separately for
mhm.
their novels. So Family Lore
Mm,
for Elizabeth Acevedo and
okay.
the wonderful, amazing, incredible Las Madres. I only say about one and not the other because I haven't yet read Family Lore. I'm going to be reading it in the next 2 weeks. But I have very much read Las Madres. I actually read an early version and then I read the published version, and they're both fantastic. I think it's one of the best books about Puerto Rico that I've ever read. I've told this to Esmeralda, who's a mentor, and I'm lucky that I get to talk to her every so often. She's amazing. Um, it's one of the best books about Puerto Rican culture I've ever read.
It's family lore. I'll keep it in mind.
Yeah, Family Lore is Elizabeth's. Esmeralda's is Las Madres.
Las Madres. Yes,
Las
yes, yes,
Madres,
yes.
yeah. And then Elizabeth's is called Family Lore, and I'm excited to dive into it. I think it should arrive later today because I just learned that I was going to be in conversation with them. I love Elizabeth Acevedo so much; it's not even funny. Her work is so inspiring to me. If you ever want to learn a little bit about her,
I
she talks.
actually
Yeah,
reached out to her. So hopefully,
she's
fingers
fantastic.
crossed.
She's fantastic. Her work is fantastic. I haven't met her yet, but there's so many of her works that speak to many of the things, in Puerto Rican background as well as
Mhm.
um, Dominican background. Yeah, I hope that she is interviewed, that she agrees to be interviewed because her work is just I think really trailblazing.
Well, if she doesn't answer when you see her, remember me.
I will tell her, I've spoken to Diana. She is looking for you.
So, the question was, could you give us like a little bit of a teaser of what your participation is going to be like?
Well, I wish I could because so in Ni Locas Ni Solas, I'm not the moderator. So
Mhm.
I'm a panelist. So I'm
Yeah.
just kind of be there and see what. Now Ni Locas Ni Solas is a great anthology.
Mhm.
Um and I love that it's not just a woman's anthology,
Mhm.
which I participate in a lot of those. I'm a sucker for those. I love seeing women's writing collected and contexted. If I know that's not a word, but put in
Mhm.
context, right? But I love contexted as opposed to contested, which it often is.
Mhm.
Um, and um, and I love the attitude, and I know the authors. I wrote the prologue for Maria Minguez Arias. She's going to be the moderator, and she wrote a very important feminist book with Nombrar el Cuerpo. I recommend it.
Mhm.
I wrote the prologue for it. I think it's going to be um in the order of our bodies, ourselves, in the order of Audre Lorde's important feminist writing.
Mhm.
I think this is an important feminist book that she has written. It's now going to be translated into English if it hasn't already. So I'm excited about that as well. She's going to be the moderator. So I'm excited to see what she will ask us, some of the other people, and to talk about the piece. For that book, I chose a piece on heartbreak, on
Yeah.
a woman. It's from my first novel, and it's just a woman who is coming to terms with her physicality and the way that she loves, and how her love, her displacement, her heartbreak impacts how she lives and how she's able to exist. Um, So not usually, the what a feminist would write um about. And then for the event with Sandra Guzman, my editor in Daughters of Latin America, also a Puerto Rican woman, by the way.
Mhm.
Sandra, I imagine she will go with all of us into our pieces. And for that one, I wrote a piece called Lucky, which is about gender violence. And it's about the case of Ariel Castro and the three women that he abducted, one of which, Gina de Jesus, was of Puerto Rican descent in
Mhm.
Ohio. And, he kept them in a basement for years, right? Um, so glad he's dead. And so I talk about their voices
Yeah.
and how, who they were when they came out of that basement, and how the process for all three of them, Gina, but also the other two women who were white women, white girls, when they were abducted, um, and what it was like for them to be able to speak, even
Yeah.
to recover their voices, what they had to say, right? Even as people all around them were labeling them the saved victims, the lucky ones. How lucky were they really, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so that piece went into that anthology, of which I'm really proud to be a part of.
Yeah.
Just the breadth of what Sandra did. I hope you go to that event when you come.
Yeah,
It's
I'm gonna try my best. Like I'm
so
still trying to
much.
I'm still trying to understand the ticket process. Like, is it included in the street fair admission?
Yes,
Hopefully.
it is. Yeah. There are
Then
some that are different, but that one I believe is. But
keep an eye out for me. I'll be there.
you should talk to Lisa Paley, because even if it isn't, you should be able to get entrance to everything as part of as a member of your project and as a scholar. Lisa Paley, do you know who Lisa Paley is? She has
No, how do you spell her
press
last name?
Paley, I believe. And I might be able to introduce you via email when I hang up. I'll send her an email and copy you,
Oh, that'd
just
be awesome.
so that you
That'd
can
be
actually
fantastic.
choose what, where you want to be for each thing that has to do with your project, whether it's ticketed or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's such a value for you to
Yeah, for sure.
choose some sessions that you may immortalize, right? And keep in an archive where people can access it later for history.
That'd be that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I think we went through all the questions, but a bit of more of my own question.
Yeah.
Will these anthologies be available for purchase at
I'm
the street fair?
sure. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure at the fair. Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
know that Daughters of Latin America is already around and available.
Yeah, I saw it on Books and Books
Yeah.
online.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this book is going to be around for a long time. It's 140 authors. Just, there's even indigenous writing that Sandra, really worked hard to have translated into English and Spanish, because it will be out in Spanish by November.
Oh,
For the first time ever, there's like seven, I think, indigenous writers who would never know what they were writing until now. I mean, it's a groundbreaking book.
that
Um,
is so
yeah.
exciting.
Oh my goodness. She mixes they're queer writers, and she just really went into this whole intersectionality of women's writings, not only of Latin America, but of their diasporas.
Yeah.
The diaspora alone is like a whole country, a whole mixed up country, right? So yeah, and then Ni Locas Ni Solas has been available, and it'll be there. I'm absolutely sure. I'm absolutely sure you're gonna love the Miami Book Fair. It's
I
just
am so excited. I'm gonna show up with my camera.
oh, for sure. I'm probably going to live there. I'm lucky enough to get roped into one thing or another. Last year I participated in Richard Blanco's
I
ma-
saw that you did an interview with Isabel Allende. Was it an interview or a
several.
conversation? I
Yeah.
was like, because Isabel Allende is my mom's favorite author. And I was like, damn, my mom would have loved this.
Oh, she would love Isabel. Isabel is so I interviewed her for the first time in 2014,
Mhm.
and I just hounded her for years, and we became friends. She's such a good friend and such a good mentor, and just such a good model for living. I'm always watching how she lives because I just love how she lives. I love how she writes, but I love how she lives. How she lives her writing. We need to learn how to live like she does. Really. I've never seen a person who handles life so well and who sees so clearly what life is about and what she's supposed to be doing when. I've never seen somebody like that. Yeah.
Should have come to this book fair down, but
Yeah. Yes. No, the book fair is amazing. You'll really love it.
I will be there. But yeah, I guess that this concludes our interview. Thank
Okay.
you so much for
Of
getting
course.
back to me so quickly. I got your email and I was like, oh my gosh, she's here.
Yeah. Yeah. Normally, I mean, it's just a conversation, right? And I think these conversations are useful for people to put things into context. How did they live? What did they do? Like, all your questions about process, I found very interesting because it makes us have to think about things that sometimes we do without awareness of how we're
Yeah,
doing it. There's no guide for other people who may want to, do
for
their own.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
For
Diane.
sure.
Please stay in touch and please say hello when you come down for the fair.
Yes, ma'am. Keep an eye out for the hair.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Oh,
Don't
thank you.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.